You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this episode in our series Let's Talk Sustainable Business. It's brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. Today, I will be continuing the conversation with Rasha Hasaneen, Vice President Innovation, PM Excellence, and Executive Director for the Center of Healthy and Efficient Spaces, and Scott Tew, Vice President Sustainability and Managing Director, Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability. Both work at Trane Technologies. First, let me introduce to you our two guests. Rasha holds a Master of Science in Engineering from Stanford University and received her PhD from Texas A&M University, and she was holding executive positions first at SAP and then GE during working on her thesis. Scott holds a Master of Ecology and Environmental Science from Livingston University and continued his academic education at Harvard and Cornell. He started his career in communications and public affairs at Ciba Specialty Chemicals and now has a distinguished career at Trane Ingersoll Rand over the last 14 years. Welcome back, Rasha and Scott.
Thank you, Uwe.
Thanks, Uwe.
And let's build on what we heard the last time. Maybe you want to recap a little bit the discussion we had about why Trane Technology is actually engaging so actively in sustainable innovation.
Yeah, I'm happy to do a brief recap, Uwe. And that's in the last episode we chatted about our journey, and the journey has really been around how do you improve a company's impact in all areas of how it operates, of its value stream from supply selection and raw material selection all the way to customer outcomes. And how do you do that without big trade-offs, sort of negative trade-offs of efficiency, of capacity. And so our company's journey has been on two things, focusing on the big impact areas like greenhouse gas footprint reductions, and on this area of providing solutions, long-term solutions that do not accept negative trade-offs.
Yeah, and today I would like to dive a little bit deeper on, how sustainable innovation can be successful in process terms. And I would like to start with, how would you define targets? Rasha, can you explain this a little bit?
Sure. I think that, the way we think about sustainable innovation is we really start with our purpose and our overall business strategy. And so when we were looking at defining our sustainability targets, Scott, myself, and members of our product management and engineering team really spent a lot of time defining what we call our sustainability pathways, or the ways in which we can meet our sustainability commitments for 2030. And they are very ambitious. So we started to look at what are the areas that we could credibly and effectively execute on those commitments. Once we identified those sustainability pathways, it became clear that we needed to define areas or innovation portfolios tied to those pathways. And the core there in really understanding how we could really get to our 2030 commitments was really thinking about our core portfolio, understanding that we were quickly going to reach the physical limitations of our components or our system components, and then really starting to expand our thinking beyond the component into systems and systems of systems to really start to look at our total impact. And that's uncomfortable for us because we typically, want to innovate in the areas that we can control. Once we start having to partner and influence in order to be able to really meet our sustainability commitments, we start to really challenge ourselves to innovate. And so, the process took quite a bit of time and we spent a lot of time ideating in small groups across the organization with experts in the markets and our products, et cetera, to really come down to the 4 or 5 key areas we were going to go innovate in. And now we have these innovation portfolios that allow us to really explore how to transform those areas.
Russia, that sounds really interesting, because in the last episode of this podcast, we already spoke about that you guys have a lot of engineers
Mm-hmm.
in your organization. And, the way I know engineers, they're very proud of what they do and they want to design and develop it themselves. And you're now talking about partnerships. How does that go down with them?
um with a spoonful of sugar. No, it goes down. It's I think it's a journey. I think it's very clear that a lot of the more transformative innovation is going to happen um with partners. I had a friend, and I can't actually take credit for this analogy myself, but in a lot of large companies, function like a growing glacier. They grow very, very slowly, but they seem to be sort of standing still. They're not, right. Obviously, the glacier is growing, and the way it grows is by ice forming really around the edges of the glacier and continuing to become part of the larger whole. And so that's how I like to think about innovation. Is we still have a running business that essentially
Mm.
operates and really is very successful. And we continue to drive what we call sustaining innovation in that space. But where there is real transformative innovation is with those partners that aren't encumbered by the need to continue to deliver increasing returns quarter over quarter. They can take bigger risks. They can make bolder statements. And if we figure out how to partner with these partners well, we get the best of both worlds. And it takes a little bit of time for our engineers to think through that, but they've been surprisingly open to really working with us on that process.
It's tempting to say something about the glacier thing, because show me a glacier that's growing these days, and
Right.
that's why you're
It's
working on.
ironic. It's ironic to talk about glaciers in a climate focused podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is very interesting, and I hear from more and more companies that they realize if they want to achieve ambitious targets around sustainability, it has to be in partnership with sometimes very unlikely partners which you hadn't even thought about in the past. So I'm very interested in this approach you're taking, and it seems to be doing very well for you, because it sounds like you can uh, marry that way the short-term objectives you have with the longer-term targets, which is something a lot of companies are struggling with, of course. So thank you for sharing that. And I would like to ask you, Scott, you know, if you do that, how do you make sure that you address the right challenges that you see ahead of you?
Yeah, it's a fair question about which future scenario you should plan against, and I think that we probably struggle with that too in the early days. I think many times businesses struggle with any type of scenario assessment because you wonder if your assumptions are based in grounded in assumptions that are based in probabilities that will happen, or if it's just pie in the sky, if it just can't happen. And there's this whole spectrum of scenarios that we all are aware of, and maybe you've worked in, and wherever your listeners work. And we did the same thing in the early days, but I would say that we began to think about but do we trust the themes? That's where we landed, which if the theme of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, if that theme is real, if we believe that theme as a company, if we believe that the scenarios that are out there outside the company and then the ones that we've developed inside the company, if we believe the scenario and the assumptions behind them and the impacts that are on the horizon, then I think it's incumbent on the company to figure out what's the company's role and what's the industry that you're in's role. And our leadership team took that very seriously. And so we began to think about the scenario of climate impact and our role in negating or in reducing our company's footprint and impact in a way that was meaningful, not just meaningful for the company, but meaningful scientifically, which is why we were the first industrial company to set a science-based target for carbon reduction. We've just recently submitted for the second round, or sort of 2.0 for science-based targets for our Gigaton Challenge, because we really are serious about doing our part as a company, and also to Rasha's earlier comments about influencing the greater industry to do a bigger positive impact as an industry sector. And I think that that's what any company that depends on a future scenario, that's how you would internalize it. And then once you've internalized it, you should be able to recognize that in bold commitments, because companies like ours, and probably like many of your listeners are in, once a company has set a bold target, then you can expect them to begin reporting on their progress, to explaining their metrics, to explaining the pathways, sort of their roadmaps to achieve the targets. And that in turn is what influences policymakers, regulators, employees, the greater industry. And I think all those things sort of have a domino, a ripple effect that can be very positive, I think, for the environment, for the social infrastructure, as well as for what we're trying to accomplish as it relates to climate.
I think, Scott, we should the majority of our listeners will be familiar with science-based targets. I sometimes find it a bit misleading because the targets aren't based on science. They are based on the assessment of your capabilities and your industry's contribution against science-based scenarios. So the 1.5 degree climate scenario, or the 2 degree, or if you really want to be miserable, the 3 degree scenario. And you commit to that, and you can do this on scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions, which are basically internal, and also on scope 3, which is looking at your whole value chain, of course. So if people would like to know more about science-based targets, you find some reference on the internet there. So let's stay with that. And you have done that, obviously, and you have gone ahead with that long before it's become fashionable, because a lot of companies are doing it now. And I think the big challenge is the scope 3 element of that approach. But the Science Based Target Initiative makes sure that the reporting is done in a structured way. So let's get back to what you've raised. And I would like to understand, Rasha, a little bit better. When you go into the innovation process, you surely have an ideation and then an evaluation step. How do you make sure that this is related to the ambitious targets you've given yourself?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The innovation process is not, there's no real rocket science there. We do have a pretty established process, but in terms of aligning it really to our sustainability ambitions and our purpose, I would kind of address your question in kind of two levels. The first level is, how do we make sure that all of our product development and all of our innovation across the company takes into account sustainability, in addition to having protocols around design for sustainability. One of the things we've talked about and continue to emphasize is, as part of the business case for a product, the sustainability impact, or the carbon impact, for example, should be addressed. We certainly do it for all of the innovation coming out of the core or the central corporate team, in that all of our projects have a carbon impact. In fact, we decline technologies that take us backwards. So we will, even if there is potentially longer term implication for example, a customer, if it doesn't have a net positive impact on our carbon footprint, we typically wouldn't go after the technology in that case. But
Rasha, can I just briefly interrupt? Are you
Mhm,
saying that, let's say you have two projects
mhm.
and one is more profitable than the other, but it has a much worse carbon impact, you would still, even so it's more profitable, abandon it?
We don't typically take it to the more or less like, remember, my team is working in the let's evaluate if the technology works
Hmm.
first. And typically when we get a technology coming in, we're not at the business case level yet.
Hmm.
When we get a technology coming in that does X, if it does X by consuming twice as much energy as the current situation, we typically don't even take it beyond the technical
Yeah.
feasibility stage. So I'll give you let's not talk hypotheticals. I'll give you a basic example. During the pandemic, obviously we evaluated a lot of technologies around pathogen elimination in the air. Some of those technologies, we know heat kills pathogens. We manage heat. Some of those technologies basically involved heating the air to very, very high levels, killing the pathogen, and then recooling the air. Very expensive, right? But very effective in killing pathogens and other sort of other types of indoor air quality issues, right? We did not pursue technologies that use that approach. We preferred to pursue technologies that had a net positive impact on our sustainability goals. That's what I mean by we typically would not go after a project that we know is going to have negative sustainability impacts. We don't even take it to the business case phase. We just basically say this does not align with our sustainability ambitions.
Understand. Yeah, that's very clear. So, but what I hear you say, they are phased out before they even get to the business case
Mhm.
point. Yeah, interesting.
Exactly. And so what we've been encouraging and have been building into our business operating system is really, as part of the business case, looking at the impact on carbon footprint and sustainability. And that's how we really think through making sure every project has a potentially net positive impact on our customers' carbon footprint. On the other side of that, we actually do regular ideation sessions, and we're getting ready to really step it up and do a company wide crowdsourcing initiative around solving big sustainability challenges. And so that gets a little bit more at the transformative innovation. And
Hmm.
there, the goal of the innovation is to solve a sustainability challenge versus having the goal of the innovation being to potentially solve a sort of a core unmet customer need and then looking at the sustainability impact. Here, we're talking about sort of big, bold goals around solving a sustainability challenge. And so we're getting ready to kick that off company wide. But we have over the years done one or two medium sized ones with a couple of hundred engineers to really ideate around sustainability issues, things like passive cooling, or things like managing humidity, which we know is a big energy consumer in HVAC systems. That sort of thing. We've had broad brush ideation sessions to generate out of the box ideas, to help us think differently about meeting those goals, while without those trade-offs that Scott talked about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I'll pick on that no trade-off, Scott. If I listen to what Russia just said, it would interest me to see how that can link with the total impact of the company, because I mean sustainability has the environmental aspects, but it also has social aspects, of course, uh, in-house and also with your business partners. how do you make sure that this is then aligned? How do you organize that within your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, Uwe, around how do we organize it? And you're right. We as a company have been working in sort of all the areas of what commonly known is called ES&G, the environmental, social, and governance areas of the company. And considering, to Rasha's point, how do we do that without negative impacts on the social side, meaning how we treat our people and how we work and are active in communities where we live and have investments. And then number two, of course, in the environmental side, which we've talked a lot about, working on those big priority issues like climate impacts. And then thirdly, the governance side, areas such as how do you actually do business globally? Do you do it ethically? Do you have procedures to ensure that how we do business in Europe is very similar to how we do business in the African continent and or Middle East and in the U.S. And so we've taken all these steps to make sure that in all those areas that we are being very intentional with our policies and procedures, behaviors, and also that we are the other piece here, which is to your point about business partners and partners outside the company. I think for how we partner outside the company, there's two big areas. One is a learning and the other is a doing. So when I think about the conference board and this podcast and working with people like you, Uwe, I think that that's an area where we as a company can learn from others. And so we are very intentional in participating and being active and proactive in groups like the Conference Board, World Wildlife Fund, World Environment Center, World Economic Forum, and others where we actively participate to learn from others. How are others impacting their sector? How are others accomplishing wherever they are on their journey around big issues like climate impact? And so what can we learn from that and take back inside our company and use it to improve how we practice what we're trying to do? Secondly is beyond learning, though, there's also the doing side. And on the doing side, we also work with outside partners. Sometimes we're working collaboratively with our industry peers as we think about next generation technologies, next generation approaches and applications in the built environment and transportation. And we work collaboratively on the possibilities around how do you get ahead of current compliance standards and how do you do better as a collective rather than just a single company. We certainly have examples of that and have had some great success over the past 7 or 8 years working with the industry partners. But we also work with some of those same non-governmental organizations to go and do more. So we work closely with groups like EDF and the Natural Resources Council. We work closely with them on things like policy. So, many times a single company can do very little around policy and regulations, but collaboratively with NGOs, you can do a lot more. You can develop white papers together. You can paint the possibilities of a different solution set than what may be available today so that policymakers and regulators can base their next generation regulations on something that's based in fact and also based in possibility. And so we work with a lot of global NGOs in that respect too. So there's a learning and a doing partnership, and we're very active in both sides of that.
Yeah, that leads me to asking Rasha about that's quite fundamental in some aspects, and you can challenge even the way you do business currently. Does your innovation process cater for the possibility to even change the business model in parts of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, when we think about innovation, we've got a few sort of entities that think about innovation. We've got sort of sustaining innovation that happens with the product teams in the business units. We have networks of excellence who are really focused on, what I would call technology sort of led innovation. And then my team is very much focused on innovation from a market led perspective. And there, the majority of what we do is really focused on on changing is thinking differently about a business model, thinking about a market where we don't quite play today, or an adjacency that maybe isn't something we would typically do in the business unit. And so we do actually spend time thinking about different business models, and how we might go to market. We collaborate actually pretty closely with Scott and his team around how business models specifically tied to sustainability are evolving, how those standards are evolving, and how those standards could potentially give way to new and innovative business models for more sustainable solutions. And so that's definitely a collaborative effort. But we do actually think very differently about business models, at least within the core. We've stood up multiple rental businesses, for example, in our commercial HVAC um, organization. We have an energy business, where we're looking at both demand and supply side energy in our commercial HVAC business. We have solar products in our Thermo King business that offset the emissions from that'll essentially allow you to run your auxiliary power unit using solar panels. That's actually doing really well. These are all the types of innovations. Those are not traditionally how we would go to market. Those are not traditional business models for us, but they're areas that we're innovating to allow for a more sustainable outcome.
What I hear you say is very encouraging, I think, because what you are saying for me is, when you look at sustainability as a driver for innovation, then you suddenly look outside your normal realm, and
Exactly.
and you see a wider picture, and that opens up even new business opportunities. So
Exactly.
very often, people talking about ESG or sustainability or CSR, whatever the acronym might be, in the words of compliance. But we have talked all the way about business opportunities, and I think that's a very encouraging message you've given us here. And talking about encouragement, I mean, we didn't dwell too much on the pandemic so far, and I think we see a light, some light at the end of the tunnel of this here. And I would love to hear from you guys. How do you see the business world evolving after we hopefully sooner rather than later get out of that pandemic? What do you think?
Well, I'll go first, Rasha. Just a few thoughts. I think that the pandemic has certainly taught all of us individually as well as our companies about the power of resiliency, and this whole concept of resiliency that in the past seemed something that other people worry about, something that really didn't have something that seemed like a concept or a theory more than practice. But we've all learned to practice resiliency this year. It's been tough. It's been hard for all of us personally and for our companies. But I think here we are in December and going into 2021, and I think resiliency now has different meaning for us all, and I think our
Mm,
company will do a much better job going forward around scenario assessments, around resiliency preparations, and I think more long-term thinking will stick, whether we're talking long-term thinking related to climate impacts or long-term thinking in terms of employment and employee engagement and recruiting, retention. All of those things have taken on new meanings that I think will last long after the pandemic is a memory.
And I would also add, Scott, I think the market is shifting in a couple of ways. So, we when we think about the pandemic, one of the things I'm very proud of with our company is that we really have the ability to address multiple elements of this pandemic. The first is around indoor air quality and indoor environmental quality. That's an area we've played in, and have expertise in, and have been looking at for decades. The market hasn't necessarily been focused on that. We've got, there's a lot of research on the impact of indoor air quality. and indoor environmental quality like lighting and noise, on productivity and learning in schools and sleep and health and well-being. But it hasn't necessarily been a priority because it's almost invisible. It's hard to sense. And that's not even talking about the impact to the economy of lost days to cold and flu. And there's technology, and there has been technology to minimize the spread of these types of infectious disease for quite a long time. It's just been very hard to get traction. And so if anything, I think once the pandemic sort of passes, you can't unlearn what you learned. And there's a lot of people that learned a lot about the air they breathe and the environments they live in over 90% of their time. So I think we're going to see a shift in awareness and in interest of not just occupants, but of building owners and homeowners and so on, to really ensure that the environments that they're spending most of their time in are as healthy as possible. And so, I'm really excited to see how that market plays out. Right now, we're in a bit of a hype cycle. Everyone's buying purifiers and is very worried about it. But I think, again, as we get past the pandemic and start to get sort of what I hope to back to a new normal, I do believe people are going to continue to see that in a different light. I think the other thing that is that we talk about but don't think about as critically is vaccine distribution. The group of vaccines that have been developed for this pandemic are new. They've been developed with really Nobel Prize winning technology, and they're coming out with high sensitivity to temperature. And ensuring the viability of these types of vaccines moving forward, I personally believe, is going to be really critical. And there's not a lot of people that can get things down to minus 70 degrees and ensure that it stays at those temperatures throughout the cold chain. And that's something, we do every day. We do it with food. We do it with turkeys. We do it with ice cream. And we do it with, believe it or not, we do it with blood and plasma and organs. We have an entire air business that does that. But really, having that be a lot more in the public eye around, is that vaccine viable? And the more we have these DNA and RNA based vaccines, the more we're going to have the need for this sort of consistent and trustworthy cold chain to ensure that whatever it is that's going into my body is actually viable, because there's going to be few of them. They're going to be expensive, but they're going to also need to be, they're going to need to be effective as they are with this pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with pharmaceuticals and with in that industry. And I'm excited and extremely proud to be part of a company that really has the capability and can contribute to, a better environment and a better sort of health situation for everybody, sort of globally. And those that would be sort of my personal take on the next what's ahead at sort of post pandemic.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing these very positive outlooks and encouraging ones. So to both of you, Rasha and Scott, thank you so much for the interesting insights in sustainable innovation. And thank you for sharing this with our listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uwe.
So if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. And we are really appreciative of feedback, so you can write to us at sustainability@tcb.org. And for now, thank you for listening, and please join us again after the holiday break. Thank you and goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.